Welcome to the ID Den podcast, the show for teachers ready to step outside the classroom and into their next chapter. I'm your host, Charity Bosch, and I know firsthand how overwhelming it can feel to leave teaching behind. Whether you're exploring instructional design, navigating corporate culture, or just figuring out your first steps, this show is your roadmap. Each episode will tackle the real challenges, share practical strategies, and prove that your teaching skills are exactly what the world needs, just in a different setting. Let's turn that classroom expertise into your career advantage. In today's episode, we are going to talk about how to leverage your teaching skills in instructional design. Your teaching skills are your secret weapon. Most brand new instructional designers are going to struggle with things that you do naturally because of your experience in the classroom. You're not starting from scratch. You're translating your expertise. There's a difference. And the corporate world needs what you already have and are able to offer. Stop thinking that you need to learn everything new and you're starting over, because that's not the case. So focusing on this mindset shift that could change everything for you and how you proceed moving forward in your transition. You want to switch your mindset from I don't know instructional design to I've been doing this for years in a different context. Your classroom has been your lab for learning science. Your teaching experience is like an advanced practicum in human behavior because, after all, children learners aren't all that different from adult learners. Yes, there are some differences. I'm not going to say it's exactly the same, but I think it would surprise you to find out how much adult learners have in common with child learners. So let's dive into the first skill, needs analysis. That phrase might seem foreign to you if you haven't heard it before. It is kind of more of an instructional design phrase, but I guarantee that you have been conducting needs analyses your entire career. You are doing this when you are assessing your learner needs instantly in the classroom. You are doing this when you are identifying those knowledge gaps and skill deficits, usually on a daily basis. You are doing this when you are recognizing when those prerequisite skills are missing. How many times have you started in on a lesson, let's say in second grade, and you realize, oh gosh, all of those first grade skills are missing with these 3 students that maybe came from a different school or had been homeschooled or moved from out of state. Those abilities are basically the same thing as conducting a needs analysis. So, how do you leverage this in instructional design? You are able to ask better discovery questions in client meetings or stakeholder meetings. You're able to spot performance gaps that other people are going to miss because they haven't had the years of practice that you have had. You are going to be able to design targeted interventions instead of just generic training. And that, I will tell you, is groundbreaking when it comes to corporate training instructional design. I experienced this when I got my first job outside of the classroom with a utility trade school and was working on a course. And I said in the instructor manual, we should have some ideas to support these instructors with struggling learners and advanced learners. And people looked at me like I had 2 heads. They were like, what are you talking about? We just put in the course, what needs to be in the course, and that's it. And I said, no, because even at the adult levels, you are still going to have struggling learners. You're still going to have advanced learners, and you should be building in ways to support them. So that's something that you're going to be able to come in and be way ahead of the curve and leverage a skill that most instructional designers that have gone to school to learn and don't have that practical experience are going to miss, because that's not part of instructional design training. That is a teaching skill that you can bring in, and it is incredibly valuable. And once I was able to provide examples and show them just how quote unquote easy it could be, it was something that became standardized within all instructor manuals, was to provide that information that was tailored to the specific course. You bring all of that to the table right off the bat. The next skill I want to dive into are learning outcomes. You have been having to write measurable, observable outcomes based on standards, right? We have our state standards, our Common Core standards, all of those things. which don't always translate nicely to a measurable, observable outcome, or maybe one standard encompasses many measurable, observable outcomes. So you've been having to take a look at those standards and write those outcomes. You have to write outcomes in instructional design. You have been aligning your assessments to those outcomes. That is still something that we do in instructional design. And most importantly, probably, you've been breaking complex skills into smaller components. And if you're a second or lower elementary school teacher, you might be thinking, I'm not breaking complex skills up. They might not be complex to you, they are to your students. So that is a skill that can be leveraged even in higher levels, even in corporate or higher academics. How do you leverage it in instructional design? You can write business-focused learning outcomes that your stakeholders are going to understand, that simplify things for your learners and help guide your course creation. You can create assessments that actually measure behavior change. And I think the biggest thing out of all, you are able to avoid the content dump trap that plagues corporate training. I can't tell you how many times I've been handed a binder and said all of this information in this binder needs to become a training. That is called a content dump. And you are able to sidestep those content dumps because you are able to say, no, hold on. What are the goals here? What are we trying to accomplish? What are the outcomes we're looking for? And then we'll see what in this hefty binder is going to help support that. The next skill is scaffolding. This kind of goes hand in hand with the idea that I implemented at that trade school as far as supporting struggling and advanced learners. That is foreign in corporate America training. Scaffolding. You know what scaffolding is. I remember the first time I said scaffolding, again, people looked at me like I had two heads. They were like, I don't know what you're talking about. What is scaffolding? I don't know what that means. You've been sequencing your learning logically for your learners, providing that appropriate support at each level to build to that gradual release of responsibility to the learners. That's scaffolding. People in corporate America don't understand what that means. So you can leverage the skill that you've been practicing your entire career in instructional design by structuring complex training programs that build expertise systematically. Instead of expecting someone to become an expert after one course, you're able to see it's probably going to take maybe 2, 3, 4 courses to build to an expert level. Here's how we help support them to get there. You're able to design practice opportunities that mirror real world application and again, help support mastery. And you're also able to create support materials that learners actually use. I can't tell you how many times I've come into a job and I'm like, oh, those are the job aids? Yikes. Is anyone actually using them? No. Well, no wonder. And then because of your expertise as a teacher, you're able to take a look, see what the issues are very quickly, and design something that people are actually going to use and that will actually be helpful because of your experience with scaffolding. The next skill is differentiation. Again, this is a teaching skill. This is not an instructional design skill. This is something that you come in and you're going to provide a whole new perspective, going back to that supporting struggling learners, scaffolding, all of those things. Differentiation is also a big thing. And we call that lately in instructional design, I've been seeing a lot of push for personalization within training in the corporate world. Your ability to differentiate comes in super handy when it comes to personalizing learning for different employees, for different roles, for different goals, because you've been able to recognize different experience levels within the same group. We have never been handed a class full of 24, 32, 36 sometimes students that are all the exact same level. That's not reality. And it's also going to be that way in corporate training. You might have 6 to 10 different people that have the same job title and are expected to complete the same role, but they're at different experience levels within that. So you are able to leverage your ability from the classroom into corporate or higher education. You have also been adapting your content delivery for various audiences. I know when I was a teacher, I rarely used the exact same lesson the exact same way year after year because every year my group of students was different. You've also been providing multiple pathways to the same learning goal. You have had to deal with, I'm sure, at least I know I did all the time, all of the parents who like to complain about how we do math nowadays and how there's so many different ways. When I was a kid, I just learned the normal way to do it and that was it. Now we might teach a student two, three, four different strategies to do the same problem. That comes in super handy when you are developing multiple pathways to a learning goal. You can leverage this in instructional design through branching scenarios so that you can have people start at different places in a scenario based on their experience. If they're answering things the correct way, you can have them skip ahead. You can build in those things and also create optional modules for advanced learners when it comes to e-learning. You can also build in multiple ways to access and process the information. A lot of times you'll see a big push for e-learning, but I stand firm that sometimes e-learning isn't the best way. So you're able to say, okay, great, maybe we do an e-learning for this part of this topic. And then we have some sort of short instructor-led module that they take after they complete the e-learning. And you can figure out those different ways to get to access, process the same information, land at the same level of mastery that can be varied and tailored based on the different experience levels within the organization. The next skill I want to talk about is formative assessment. You probably know what that is. Checks for understanding. In instructional design, a lot of times you'll hear knowledge checks, or if you've taken an e-learning, you might see it at the top of the slide, knowledge check, and then there's a question. You've been doing formative assessment. You've been monitoring learning in real time and making adjustments to your instruction based on that learner feedback that you're getting. You provide that immediate corrective feedback. You can do the same thing and leverage this in instructional design by building knowledge checks throughout courses, not just the end, and that go beyond multiple choice. There are different ways to ask questions and not true or false either. You can also design meaningful practice activities that are going to truly reveal understanding so that even if it's an instructor-led course, the instructor is going to be able to see who's getting it and who might still need some support or maybe some challenge. You can create those feedback systems that are going to guide learners to the correct understanding without giving away the answers. And then the last skill that I would like to talk about is classroom management. And you might be thinking, when am I going to use classroom management in instructional design? I thought I wasn't delivering courses. Most of the time, no. However, if you're delivering beta tests or you're doing train the trainers, you will be doing some delivery and you will need to manage those adult classrooms. You have been managing the attention and engagement of your students for years. That can still apply even in e-learning. It still applies as you help support an instructor through building an instructor manual and delivering those train the trainers. You've been having to set clear expectations and procedures. That makes your course writing so much better because you're so used to making things clear, concise, succinct, that it's easy for you to do, whereas it might be more difficult for someone else. You have also had to motivate plenty and plenty of reluctant participants. And while, yes, one of the perks to working with adult learners is there's not as much trying to convince them because either A, they have to be there because it's a job expectation, or B, they want to be there because they're trying to advance in their career or something like that. So you don't have as reluctant participants, but you can still have those reluctant participants coming across, and you can leverage this in instructional design by designing engaging interactions that are going to maintain attention, by providing support for instructors on instructor-led training for how to help grab that attention, building those in intentionally in your design plans. You can structure training with clear expectations and outcomes, and you also know how to build intrinsic motivation into learning experiences. A lot of times in instructional design with adult learners, we talk about WIFM or what's in it for me. That is a way to build intrinsic motivation, and I build that into my courses. Right at the beginning of the course, I'm going to, whether it's an e-learning or instructor-led course, help the learners see What's in it for them? How is it going to make their job easier, their life easier, help them be more successful, help the business be more successful, which then turns into more profits and salary raises. And, there's different ways that you can build intrinsic motivation within adult learners. And that's something that you have been practicing, is building that motivation for those reluctant learners. Comes in handy there. So, how do you translate this from teaching to instructional design? The first thing is going to be mapping your teacher language to ID terminology. Sometimes things stay the same. Learning outcomes in teaching is the same as learning outcomes in instructional design. Sometimes you're going to have to translate it. Scaffolding, that's a big teacher word. That's not a big instructional design word. You might have to do a little bit more work to bridge that gap so that people understand what you're talking about. Another thing that you can start doing is quantify your classroom impact with data. So test scores are kind of an easy route to go here when it comes to quantification of data, but it's not the only area. Start looking for ways that you can write down succinct bullet points of the improvements that your students have made because of your teaching throughout the year in various aspects. It doesn't all have to be through academics. It could be things like student behaviors, or the overall motivation within your class. Maybe at the beginning of the year, you have a lot of reluctant students, and at the end of the year, you only have a couple. So try and get creative, but try and quantify and do things in percentages or hard numbers, because corporate likes to have quantifiable data. Start framing your teaching challenges as problem-solving wins and talk about your method behind it. So a lot of times you might get asked, say in an interview, tell me about a time that you encountered a challenge and how did you overcome that? So you want to think through, what was the problem that I had? What was the solution? How did I get there? What did it look like after the solution was implemented? So start looking at your teaching challenges as those problem-solving situations that you could use in interview questions like that. Make sure that you're documenting your systematic approach to learning design. How are you doing things uniquely? How are you doing things in your classroom? And some real examples of translating these teaching skills are taking your lesson planning and turning it into course design. Lesson planning is very teacher, course design is very instructional design. Parent conferences become stakeholder management. Your parents are your stakeholders of your students. So you have to manage stakeholder expectations. Oh, your student's really struggling. They're probably not going to come up to grade level by the end of the year because in third grade, they're reading at a kindergarten level. So how have you managed those stakeholder expectations? Your parent-teacher conferences can get translated into stakeholder management. Classroom pivots become agile methodology. The TV projector, whatever you have in your classroom, went out, and all of a sudden you had no way to go through the PowerPoint slides. How did you pivot? That shows that agile methodology of being able to think on your feet, move quickly, and get things to still work. Student motivation is the same thing as learner engagement when it comes to adult learners. So, how have you been able to motivate your students becomes how you've been able to engage your learners. Teacher turned IDs are different, and it's great. And what makes them different is the fact that teachers who become instructional designers understand the difference between information and instruction. Because yes, there is a difference, and a lot of people can't see that difference, but you know the difference between just providing information and instructing learners on how to do something. You know how to motivate those unwilling learners. You can spot when something isn't working before it fails completely, because as teachers, you are constantly analyzing. What do their faces look like? What does the body language look like? Walking around, looking at them, doing independent work. What does that look like? This kid's getting it. I need to challenge them. This kid's getting it at just the right amount. They need to just keep going. This kid's completely struggling. How can I support them? You are already doing all of that. You're looking at things, you're analyzing things, you're evaluating things all day long. No wonder you want to just go sit on the couch and eat some ice cream at the end of the day. You're exhausted, right? But those skills are things that make teachers who turn into instructional designers phenomenal at what they do. You also naturally think about transfer and application, not just knowledge. That's a big thing. A lot of times, and you've probably taken some teacher professional development courses where it's just, again, that knowledge dump and a multiple choice question at the end, and you can just put the thing on mute and let it play and then answer the questions, which are designed way too easily, anyways, and you pass the course without doing anything. That's not how you're going to build courses, though. You're going to make sure that there's actual transfer and application of the knowledge, not just presentation of it. So your advantage in the job market is that while others are learning theory, you have been practically applying and have that practical experience that you bring from the classroom. You can speak to both learning effectiveness and business impact. You understand how to take complex concepts and make them easy to understand and accessible. You're comfortable with iteration and continuous improvement, and that is a huge thing in the corporate world. So let's talk about some common mistakes to avoid. Do not, please, for the love of God, ever apologize for your teaching background, because it is what makes you stand out. It is what makes you unique from plenty of other applicants, and it is your huge advantage, not something to apologize for. So don't ever minimize your classroom experience, because it has taught you leaps and bounds more over the years than someone that has just been doing instructional design. I guarantee and promise you. Don't assume that you need to start over completely. You're not. You're leveraging all of the amazing skills that you have been building and refining over the years, just in a new setting. So don't underestimate what you bring to the table, because you bring a lot to the table. So you might be thinking, this is all great information. What do I do now? What are my steps forward? The first thing that you can do is start auditing your current teaching practices and translating them into ID terminology. Start taking a look. Again, an easy example is you're not lesson planning, you're course designing. It's an easy switch. It's basically the same thing, and you've been doing it for years and years. Start documenting specific examples of each skill in action. So when you start sitting down to do your lesson planning, you're documenting that you did course design. This was the topic. This was the outcome. This is the assessment. You start documenting all of those things. Your scaffolding, you start documenting that. Start getting in the habit of documenting the things that you're doing. I will say, don't document everything, because you'll be spending all your day documenting, because you're doing all of those things all the time. So pick the ones that you're really excited about, lessons that went really well, things that give you good examples to provide in an interview, and start practicing explaining your teacher wins in corporate language, whether that's through quantifying certain data and presenting it in that manner, or talking about that problem solving. I encountered this challenge. Here's the solution. Here's how I got it. Here's what the results were. And start viewing your classroom as your instructional design portfolio. Again, you might not have ever built an e-learning course before. You're doing instructor-led training all the time, just with kids instead of adults. So start viewing all of your experience in the classroom as instructional design experience to build out your portfolio. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and share this with your teacher friends who are also considering a change. Please connect with me on Instagram at the ID Den. And remember, your teaching skills aren't just transferable, they're your competitive advantage. They're what sets you apart from other applicants. They're what makes you unique. The corporate world needs people like you who understand how learning actually works in practice, not just theory. Start pivoting from, you're not changing careers, you're just expanding your impact to a different audience. And please trust that your expertise is valuable and that you have things to leverage. Leverage what you already know and what you have been working on building for years.